Hi, my name is Rob Knight. I'm a research engineer at 0xPARC. I've been working on zero-knowledge proofs and related technologies for about the last 3 years, previously on the 0xPARC project and the POD project, and most recently on POD 2, which is a next-generation recursive zero-knowledge proof system. So 0xPARC is a focused research organization working on a sort of applied research in programmable cryptography, which is sort of a new generation of cryptography, which is not focused just on encrypting messages or signing messages, but is about being able to perform programmable operations inside encrypted containers. So we can take private data and generate proofs about that data that can be shared with people, and the output of that proof, like the claim that is being justified by that proof, can be completely trusted, even though the recipient didn't see the underlying private data. And this is zero-knowledge proofs. There's also things like fully homomorphic encryption, which allows for computation over encrypted data, where the person or entity performing the computation can't actually see the data they're computing on, but can take data from multiple participants and then compute things like averages or statistical measures of that data, and then share that with the people who participated. And we've been particularly focusing on the affordances of this kind of cryptography for software engineers, for people building systems in the real world, and how this can be operationalized in a wide range of applications. So going beyond just blockchains, but also into all kinds of everyday applications that people can run on their computers, on their phones, and that can solve real problems for businesses and people alike. So I think there's sort of perennial challenges for any computer system, which is, can you make it faster? Can you make it cheaper? Can you make it more efficient? And those things we see, obviously, annual improvements. People figure out new techniques. They figure out new ways of doing things. The challenge for us is in some ways more conceptual, which is to try and understand what new possibilities this technology opens up. What are the new categories of things or the new ways of thinking about computing that are opened up by this technology? And this is where privacy, I think, has a really interesting role in that picture, because it's a fundamental assumption for cryptography that you have privacy. But in our experience, privacy on its own, or privacy as a kind of add-on, is not sufficient to build a whole system. So you need these other aspects. You need integrity, composability, interoperability. And if you can build those features into a system that has also privacy as kind of the default assumption, data is private by default rather than kind of private in the form of being hidden or as a kind of opt-out thing, then you can architect your whole system with privacy kind of baked into the fundamental basis of the design. So I think there are two reasons why privacy is important, or two ways to think about privacy being important. And one is just all the ways in which not having privacy can be harmful to you. You can lose control of your private data, you can be spied on, you can be manipulated in various ways, you can be observed and tracked. And even if you trust some of the entities that have that data, there's always a risk that they won't be able to keep that data safe and secure. And so you're opening yourself up to risk from criminality, from the exploitation of that data by people who do not have your best interests at heart and who would like to exploit that to control or influence or manipulate you in various ways. I think there's another sense in which privacy is important, and to me this, as somebody who's in my mid-40s now, I remember a time when my computer was a box on my desk, and I would type into that box, and what happened in that box stayed in the box, and if I switched the box off, that data would go silent, and everything would be there when I came back to it. Now we live in this very connected world where data is not private by default with the systems that we've built in the last 25 years. My computer is, in a sense, not really a box that lives on my desk. It's a kind of amalgamation of cloud hosting and services that are provided to me by third parties who assume that they have a right to see all of the data that flows through their systems. And so I feel like privacy has this kind of emergent property, that privacy emerges from the relationships between people and their computing devices. And I would like there to be, without this being a big, a major kind of political point or a major point about, how we organize society, just a default assumption that, like, if something doesn't need to be shared with somebody else, if there's no real reason for anybody else to have a copy of this thing, then I should be the only person who has a copy of it, in much the same way as would have been the case 30 or 35 years ago when, I edit my documents on my computer, on my desk, and nobody else needs, it's no big deal. Nobody else needs to see that. It's just not relevant to them. And so I think if we could go back to a world where the default is privacy, just because there's no need for other people to have that information, we cut out a whole range of risks and problems. I think now we're in a world that's just it's very, very clear what the risks and problems are. I think ordinary people experience much more the risks of things like identity theft that would have been a very strange idea in the early 90s. It would have involved forging paper documents and all of these kinds of things. Now we're in a world where fake data is trivially easy to produce, where voices can be faked, video can be faked, all kinds of personal identity documents can be trivially manipulated or forged. And so we're in a world where the risks are actually just much higher for ordinary people. And so having control, having integrity, having privacy is something that affects everybody. And it's not something that only a few kind of weird ideological people think about. It's something that everybody has to think about. I think it's important to recognize that actually in the past people thought there was a kind of trade-off between privacy and usability, that a private tool sort of was a kind of clunky, weird thing that you had to be a kind of bit of a privacy nut if you wanted to use that. But if you use something like Signal, for example, that is as easy to use, it's as good, it's as high quality as Telegram, for example, but private by default. Your messages are not being collected somewhere and read and analyzed by anybody. They're being read only by the intended recipients. And I think that that's a really good example of how modern privacy-conscious applications can work. Beyond that, I think you need to think very carefully about sort of what you have as your default. So if your default collaboration tools are Google Drive, for example, Google Docs, that is going to be seen by Google. And maybe you don't need that. Maybe you can use an offline word processing package and share that document with someone else. Maybe you can use encryption to share certain pieces of information with only a small number of intended recipients rather than sharing it with your cloud hosting provider. So yeah, so people do say if you have nothing to hide, then why do you care about privacy? You're not worried about anybody finding out what you're up to. Well, I think that's a naive way of thinking about things. There's lots of things that we do every day that are perfectly innocent things, and we're not trying to hide anything, or we're not ashamed of what we're doing. But we don't want people to know our financial transactions. We don't want people to know who we're talking to. We don't want people to know intimate conversations that we are having. Again, not that anything illegal or immoral or anything shameful is happening in those conversations, but if they can be observed by other people, maybe that's used to market products to you. Maybe that's used just to collect and build a profile. And you don't know when that profile will be used or what it will be used for. If you have friends or family or children, for instance, the profile on you could be linked to a profile that's being built for them, and information that you've disclosed that you thought was perfectly innocent and harmless could be used to build profiles or to market things or to influence other people who you are connected to, your friends, your family, children, etc., in ways that you just couldn't possibly have imagined. So again, this is the reason why privacy as the default makes so much sense, that you don't have to think about, do I mind if anybody sees this piece of information? Do I mind if anybody sees that piece of information? With privacy as the default, you just don't have to think about that at all. Nobody sees anything unless you choose to share it with them. And that puts you in a position there of much more control, much greater peace of mind. You don't have to worry about what might happen at some point in the future that you can't anticipate. You know that the communications that you've made, the actions that you've taken are private. So for me, the utopian outcome here is that we actually flip the entire relationship of observer and observed around. We're in a situation right now where we have large, powerful entities that want to observe and track people so that they can market to us. What we want and what we don't have is the inverse. I want to know what the businesses that I'm dealing with are doing. I want to know what's going on in their supply chains. I want to know what's going on in their environmental policies, what's going on in how they treat their workers. And so there is a need for information to be gathered, there is a need for information to be shared, but the direction of travel that we have right now is that we should, by default, are opted into sharing everything with people who are not sharing anything with us. So I think we want to see a world where ordinary people feel empowered to make choices in their own lives that align with their own values and that are theirs to make. And when they do so, they're free from influence, they're free from surveillance, they're free from that becoming part of some permanent record or profile that's being kept about them. And I think that flipping around, that turning around of that relationship is fundamentally what we can have particularly with programmable cryptography technologies, where we can build in those rules and those structures into the nature of the interactions that we have with our counterparties. When we deal with a company, we can require proofs from them rather than them requiring proofs from us. And I think this is something that is a reorientation or a reframing of this question away from proof good or bad to the question of who is proving what to whom and why. And so privacy, I think, for private citizens is something that we really want. I think for sort of large entities, corporate entities, institutions, we want, yes, privacy for the individuals working in those institutions, but as institutions, we want integrity, we want transparency, we want those guarantees. Again, only the information that is needed should be shared, but I do believe that we can have a world where these technologies facilitate better governance, better decision making, better and more freedom for individuals rather than the current situation, which is very much the alternative.